These are the people I go to church with on Sunday morning. And when I'm done with my days, I'm going to lay up in the cemetery with these people.
A lot of the larger ISPs, they offer some weird stuff that they really think is for stickiness, like magazine subscription. Don't use that as a blueprint. The problem was people wouldn't let us hire them. We actually had to introduce an addendum to our contract.
Every day at 4 o'clock, the modems would go offline. What do small ISPs do better than big corporations? Georgette?
Oh, I'll take this one. You know, when I first started in the industry, I had a customer that I was talking to, and we were changing their billing system, right? That we were trying to bring them onto a platform, and he was nervous. I could tell he was nervous. And he's like, look, these are the people in my community. These are the people I go to church with on Sunday morning. These are the people that I sit in the stands with at the football games on Friday night. And when I'm done with my days, I'm going to lay up in the cemetery with these people. It's my community. And I really think the smaller operators connect with their communities, and that's essential to their success.
Is that all they need to do?
No, it's not all they need to do, but it's so foundational for them. These are the people they're running into at the grocery store, and they're, driving down the street and they're doing the, hey there, the little head wag. These are their neighbors, and they want to make sure that they're servicing them.
Larry.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think, that would be one of the things I think is important is you've got the local aspect. You know these people, you're talking to these people, your support staff, friends with these people, go out with these people. They're your customers and your friends. But the other thing I think you've got that the big guys got is you can be more technology agile. You can make these decisions so much quicker than the big guys can. You can implement the new technology at much higher speeds, and that sometimes is a big differentiator.
I say that, but when I was at a large corporation, they kind of made us a small unit as we started the business, and they gave us that agility. They gave us that ability to go, oh, I want to do this, I want to try that. And then when it matured, they then brought in the bureaucracy, right? And that's generally what those big guys do, is they have a giant bureaucracy to have the controls in place, right? With the small ISPs, you control all that. So you can go and pick this technology, try that technology, and use it in a smaller market. You can mess it up and it's okay, try again. And if you got the community on your side, they're going to be okay with it too.
And even once the bureaucracy happens in a small ISP, it's not the same order of magnitude. Even the small ISPs have some of that going on, but not at any level that affects them from being able to implement things really fast, which is, I think, and we'll discuss that in a bit, but I think that's a big differentiator.
So Rick, I was going to ask you the question before, but I forgot your name when I looked at you. I just remembered it. It's good to meet you.
Yeah, Paul, right?
Right, yeah, good stuff.
No, this is good.
What would you never try to compete on directly against a big ISP?
I think there's some obvious answers, but I'm going to go with the kitchen sink bundles. I think if you literally model yourself after the larger ISPs, it might make sense in your market to do the triple play. Obviously it all starts with the internet. Then usually you go to phone, and then maybe you have to have the TV to compete.
It's much anymore, right?
But if you don't need that, don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
But don't go further than that. Like a lot of the larger ISPs, they offer some weird stuff that they really think is for stickiness, like magazine subscriptions. It's like, don't use that as a blueprint. Don't distract yourself. That's not going to change your business materially. Like, focus on the core product. And I have to add, the community building is real for sure. And you do know a lot of your customers, especially in the early days. But even if you don't know them, there's a numbers game. So yes, you could set up a large ISP in a way where you have these small units, like you were saying, and you can kind of cut through some of the bureaucracy. But when it comes to like just the touch points, when you sign up, when you need support, what are the odds that you're going to get the same person when you phone in, right? Compared to a local player, you may not know that person. The relationship building could start when they become a customer. But as you phone in and you talk to the same person, you're building the relationships from zero. So I think that is it, just a built-in advantage when being smaller. It's a numbers game at the end of the day, right?
Well, and I stalk our customers. I love to see what they're doing on Facebook or on Instagram and to see how they're involved in their communities. And it's different than just putting your name up on the outfield wall, right, for a big operator. I see our customers are literally standing at booths at the county fair. This is they're they've got a submission to the Christmas parade, and their staff members are up there and they're throwing candy off of the parade truck or whatever that is, and they're out there actually interacting with their communities on a regular basis. And I don't really see that from the larger operators. The larger operators may cut a check to sponsor something, but they're not boots on the ground building those relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And people do business with people. I say that a lot. They don't want to just do business with brands. They want to do business with people that they know, like, and trust.
For the big ISPs, because I've been a part of a few of them, it always started out what I was talking about, kind of small. You had the local techs, and a lot of times they were buying up smaller systems that some individual started with a large sum of money they made with oil or something like that, right? But over time, they're always looking, when they go to scale, it's about efficiencies and cutting costs, and they do it in such a way that they pull away from those local resources. Because I can remember, especially when I moved into the business market, it didn't make sense to have a technician out in BFE, right? They might have to drive 2 hours, but we're not going to get that many. Well, most likely there was like a chief engineer there before that was also the technician that got to know everybody, right? And people cared about them. And that really does make a difference. I really think it does.
It really does.
Yeah. Is there anything else? Is there something that we didn't think about? What's overlooked when it comes to small ISPs and how they would compete in these markets with the larger ones?
I think mergers and acquisitions is really something that is in play for the smaller operators. You're seeing some of the smaller operators unite fronts and come together, or they're buying up smaller operators to have a mid-tier company provide services. And it's kind of all over the place. Do they rebrand completely, or do they leave that existing brand in place because people already know, like, and trust the existing brand? And it's an interesting time right now because I've been in the industry for 10 years. I've never seen as many mergers and acquisitions as I'm seeing right now. And I know you keep saying I think I'm saying murders. I'm not. I'm saying mergers.
What about you, Rick?
I think that you mentioned agility on the technology side. I think agility in general.
So what about you, Larry?
I think we've already talked about the most overlooked thing is that customer experience that you can provide. Being local, knowing these people, community with these people. That's something the big guys never going to get. There's no way for them to get it, I don't think, in all the communities that they serve.
And when you're local, you're there when the thunderstorm rolls through, or the forest fire, or the hurricane, or whatever. You're part of that community trying to rebuild and get things back up and going.
Right.
You're not halfway across the country looking at national news. You're living the news.
That is definitely a huge competitive advantage for the smaller guy. You can't compete on price. When you do, they're going to just drop their price so it's under yours. I agree with Rick. The 3-tier services or 4 or start gate these weird, things that you think make customers sticky. You don't need to do those as a smaller guy. You do need to provide, obviously reliable, fast internet. You got to then get into voice. That's what we did next. We never made to the TV. And I think, to Paul's point at this point, why would you get into the TV? You've got
we did, and it was awful. It was awful. Yeah.
What about pricing? So if you are the incumbent as a small ISP in a rural area, and now the big ones have gotten funding and they're starting to build into your area, a lot of times they come in with a much lower price with a long term. Is that something that you should do, is compete on price as a small ISP?
Never compete on price as a small ISP. It was always on the service that we could provide and the capabilities and capacity. We eventually weren't even able to compete on speeds. They were bringing in 500-600 meg internet connections, but at a certain point, those are just fun numbers. I mean, unless you're doing very specific things, like you're heavily downloading or things like that, but if you can provide a quality service that can stream your Netflix or your Hulu or whatever it is into a few TVs,
And I find
people are happy.
some of the smaller operators do a much better job on digital literacy, literally teaching their customer base how to leverage their internet better than larger operators can. What does that wireless network look like in your house in reality? How's your house constructed? Do you have a unique build? Maybe they're older homes and that particular neighborhood was built with XYZ challenge, and you can overcome that with the technology you're deploying in their neighborhood.
So do small ISPs come in, and this is generally, genuinely, I'm not sure, are they moving in to compete against the large incumbents with the BEAD funding and such? Is that happening right now? Or is it really the other way that I just mentioned, where the large ones are pushing into where the other ones have been growing?
I think that in general, overbuilding is happening with the incumbents.
Mm-hmm.
It's a budget thing.
Yeah.
If you have that budget and you're going to do a fiber build and you're an independent ISP, it just isn't good business sense to go and overbuild, because then you have to compete on price because they already have that established. And I think that is kind of the one thing that you can't get around the reality. Like, they can do that. They can justify it. The take rates can be lower and it can be a longer term investment. That could be your one fiber build of the year, right? And that's why it's so devastating when you do that and then they come and overbuild you. Mm-hmm. But that does happen too. And you have to be prepared. I think the difference is if you've already established yourself in the community and there is a preference, then yeah, I don't think price ultimately doesn't matter. I have an extreme example actually of how customer loyalty was almost to a fault. We had a fully licensed band. It was 2.3 gigahertz, which is a bit of a weird band, and we ended up with a license. And we were really excited about it. Could run at higher powers. And very quickly after we got our APs up and got everything figured out, we were experiencing heavy interference. It was actually tropospheric ducting, if you know what that is. Basically, there's like kind of layers in the atmosphere, and it was over the lake, coming from this, coming from America. We were peacefully trying to enjoy, and it was, coming over. But yeah, and what was actually happening is for the majority of these customers that we had on this equipment, whenever this interference was in, they were down for the count. I would say maybe 2/5 of the time they were down. Yeah. And we were just ready to move on. And the problem was people wouldn't let us fire them. They wouldn't let us take the equipment. And we actually had to introduce an addendum to our contract, specifically around the SLAs, saying you have no SLAs. The price is what the price is. And we came to an agreement that we would give them a credit, but ultimately they had no reliability. You wouldn't know.
But they wanted the service so badly, they didn't want you to take it away from them because it wasn't consistent.
They wanted to deal with us, even if it wasn't consistent. And I think that the reason that came to be, they already had the experience with the national provider. The customer experience was so poor that they would rather deal with the inconsistency. We never foresaw that being an outcome that we had to accommodate for, but at the end of the day, we kept that running as long as we had the license, and we didn't hear from those customers. They chose customer service over reliability. I never would have thought, but it happened with probably about 24 customers.
So interference, and I don't know if this really has anything to do with it, but I'm going to tell this story. So ham operators, right? They love to broadcast at frequencies loud, and if you haven't got your shielded network right on the coax, it basically goes out there and kills everything on there. So we had an area that every day at 4:00 the modems would go offline, and we couldn't figure it out until someone saw the antenna in someone's backyard, and that guy got home and every day at 4 and would flip on his ham radio and start talking to people. So it just made me think of that when you talked about interference.
Yeah, we ran into some ham interference as well, because they get to put out some nasty power levels, which we don't.
Yeah, cowboys.
Yeah.
So we did talk about customer experience a little bit. Can you compete just on customer experience?
Actually, I want to go back to the Cowboys comment, because to me, there are a lot of operators that started their business almost accidentally. Mm-hmm. They didn't intend to
so many. That's such a common Genesis story.
They just needed internet. Yep. So they're like, well, how do I go about doing this? And then all of a sudden they're not just servicing one tower and 50 of their closest neighbors, they're now standing up multiple towers. And it has been a cowboy industry in my estimation.
Oh, it goes all the way back to just when cable started. That's
Yeah.
what it was. Someone with some cash, a suitcase full of cash, decided that they could make money by investing in it. What I noticed sort of related is with the overbuilders, they build these giant networks and spend millions, if not, hundreds, tens, hundreds of millions. And then they wouldn't make the return they needed to. So they would go bankrupt and sell off their assets. My conspiratorial mind always said, this is the plan all along, right? You get somebody with some funding. They go build this network. You get to buy it at a lower cost and they own part of you, right? So they still get to realize that, right? And get the money back without having the liability of the loans, et cetera, that they dealt with. I kind of saw that a bit happening over the years. This is a long time ago, the 90s, but I definitely remember that kind of thing happening. So what about small ISPs and big ISPs? Or really, what about small ISPs? Should they be focused on? Is it always customer experience? Is it the technology? Anything else with that?
It's got, I mean, the customer service is so important, but the network reliability. I mean, Rick's got that great example of the 2.3, people down. I have tons of examples of, my internet was out for 2 minutes. You're costing me hundreds of dollars. Yeah, and in all reality, no matter how reliable you make your service, there's going to be that time when it's down. And we always, we came up with the standard response to customers.
And it doesn't matter if it's fixed wireless or fiber.
It doesn't matter.
You're going to have outages.
There's going to be outages. If you're really losing hundreds of dollars a minute, you should have multiple providers because we're all going to go down at some point. The technology is important though. I mean, because we're all so reliant on the internet. I mean, everybody's watching this on the internet. Everybody's listening to it on the internet, and they don't want to go. I mean, those days I think are at least pretty well past us.
Did you ever give credits for the literal time people were down?
That's what I was going to.
And you'd calculate it, and it would be like 72 cents. Someone
$1.68.
They would vent for 15 minutes about all, and say, you know what? I will credit you for every second you were down, and I would put that $1.62 credit on the bill. Have a great day.
They go, I lost hundreds, thousands. I got to send everybody home. I'm really glad you see the value in our service. I understand your situation, but you really are getting a great deal for the service we provide, and we'll get this outage taken care of. I actually always love saying that to them. Is that bad?
No. It's not bad.
I think it's a bit of a reality check, right? And I agree 100%. If it's that mission critical, you need diversity.
Right.
If you can offer that diversity as a provider, if you have true diversity in your network and it does actually go all the way to the edge, then that is a phenomenal additional revenue stream that you can bake into your offering. Otherwise, that's why it's good to be friendly with your neighbors, right? If you know an operator that can help out with a secondary connection, then that benefits you, that benefits the customer, that benefits relationship with your neighbor, right? So it really is a win-win-win as long as they're willing to pay for it. And if they're not willing to pay for it, then they're just blowing off steam.
Yep.
Well, and I think communication is key. What have you empowered your customers, and do they know where you're going to be? Do they know that you're now offering an elevated service? Do they know that you may be able to rent them, mesh routers or things like that that will improve their experience? But also, are you communicating with them to celebrate their 1-year anniversary as being your customer, or the 5-year anniversary of being your customer? And oh, by the way, John's son just graduated from college. Attaboy. I see our smaller customers doing that on their Facebook pages, on their Instagrams. I see them doing notifications of
sounds just like you, by the way. That's the same thing you do.
Well,
anybody you've ever worked with.
But I'm client relations.
Did you graduate?
So I might,
Yeah.
That's where my heart is, and I love working with my customers because our customers do that with their customers.
So the small ISPs are people persons.
They're people.
I mean, that is what makes the successful small ISPs have learned to be people persons.
But it doesn't just come by default. Like I said about the numbers game comment, you got fewer staff. You're going to talk to them more often. There are things that can happen kind of accidentally that you can kind of weld that door shut. So one of the things that I see sometimes is your business grows up and you want to have, standards. Maybe you set up some departmental KPIs and you're watching a little more closely. What's your ticket resolution time? And basically incentivizing the calls to turn over more quickly. That's the first thing that's going to go is how's Billy, or didn't I see you at the grocery store the other day, or whatever. They don't have time, they're being watched. So that is a warning I would give. It doesn't, just because you're the small guy, it doesn't mean that you still have to make room for those. And I would say, I'd take it a step further. You're not just making room for those, you should be incentivizing your staff, rewarding your staff for taking that time, because that investment does pay off.
It's definitely a balance. I have fought that balance because I've always been on that side of the business through my whole career, because you got to get the efficiency, you got to get better. But I think I used to tell my staff, imagine you're talking to your Nana, right?
Yeah.
Have patience, be empathetic, show the love, help them solve whatever it is. And don't get upset with them if they don't know how to do exactly what you're saying to do. Just go through the steps and then follow up with them. Make sure you actually helped them with it. Like you'd follow up with Grant. So did that work? You got everything you needed?
Exactly.
Okay. It really made a difference when I did that, to be honest.
And you did that at a big level, huh? So that is kudos to you, because that is one of the things
A lot of
the little guys,
until it got bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah, because that is a key. I mean, following up, is this working? And not just closing the ticket second I get off the phone. This is a relationship that you're building.
So Larry, like right after Christmas, when Nana gets her new technology for Christmas, because the grandkids are going to, help her be more connected, did that drain the resources in your company to help get that new printer set up, or maybe it's a new Fire Stick or whatever?
I mean, you had more calls and stuff coming in as people tried to implement their present technology.
Because managing their printer isn't your business. Managing their internet is your business, but they still see you as the...
Well, back in the day, it was also because the computer had to be configured in a certain way. And now it's pretty ubiquitous that you can plug something in or use Wi-Fi. But back in the day, that's not how it worked. So someone got a new computer. This was the case every Christmas. A bunch of people got new computers, and I expected my tier 2 group to start help them set up whatever it is. They had no clue what they were doing.
In the early days, when we were taking people off of dial-up, the desktop computers that people had in their homes didn't have Ethernet ports. So part of our service was taking off the cover and installing a PCI card. And then you would get calls a month later, well, now my sound's not working, and your guy had my computer all taken apart, and so I think that is definitely kind of a bygone era story, but I think it is an example of the kind of support calls you can get that really aren't related. It also makes me think just of like patterns, like you were asking about Christmas, and that's definitely a real thing. You're always going to have outages, right? Sometimes the outages have nothing to do with your network. Power outages are a real thing, and maybe you've got the redundancy, in your towers or your wherever you have your infrastructure, and you've got power, so you never lost power the whole time. But unless your customers have generators, they lose power, and one of the biggest pains is the power goes down for 5 minutes, and people get impatient and they start messing with cables. You would always get a wave after, even if it's just a brief little power outage or spike, where if they would have just left alone, leave it alone.
Stop touching.
Don't touch it. It would have come back on its own. But then you got to walk them through. Well, what port is this plugged into, and do you see this light, and all that. So I think that goes back to like what you were saying in terms of like customer education. If you spend that time during the installation to preempt and say, hey, by the way, this is what you do in the event of a power outage, then you're going to have that investment pay off too.
Well, I'm also fascinated by the fact that the technicians, when they're doing the installation, they're taking pictures of what it looks like so that they can describe what it looks like. Because how many customers will move their routers into another place in the house, and then they'll be like, oh, well, it's not working the way it was working before. Well,
that's a pro move right there.
Yeah, it's not set up the way we set it up any longer.
Yep.
Hopefully they're taking pictures. We didn't start out taking pictures,
no, well,
but we
it was harder back then.
We readily found out that was a bad idea. They call in and it's like, you couldn't tell them anything about their setup. I mean, you knew what router they had, but it's in this room, and the cable comes in from here. And so we had pictures. Yeah, we quickly found that mistake and corrected it. Yeah.
That's so true. Sonar is the operational backbone for ISPs who want to move faster, serve better, and stay ahead. Discover more at sonar.software. Let's get back into it.
So now it's time for Love It or Hate It. I'll throw out some hot takes, and you tell me where you stand. You ready, Georgette?
I think so. Buckle up.
Being the first to market always beats being the best.
This is such a land grab right now. I feel like this is, again, back to the Cowboys analogy of this is kind of the Wild West. First to market out there. You're getting your name there. You're going to be what everybody else is trying to come out for. I think you got to be best. Mm-hmm. I don't think that being first to market is going to take care of it, because people have had bad experiences with ISPs. And I don't care what your technology is. If you're not taking care of your customers, they're not going to stay with you.
I don't know. I talked about the overbuilding, right? Like, that's what happens. People get settled in. Yeah, they're paying their bill, but if they're not loving their experience, the second someone else shows up and they feel they're going to have a better experience, they are going to hop over. So I think it's a hard no for me.
I hate it for the sweep then, but I hate it for different reasons. I already said I thought it was one of the biggest selling points that ISPs were fast. And so you would thought I would have said love it. But I hate it because fast without being well thought out means bugged. And just like Rick said, if I'm bugged, then when something else comes, it's you're moving because you're not happy. So my hate it was caveated with that.
It's weird for me to say love it because that's a weird term for me to say, but being a part of some big incumbents, right? They have such a large market share that they have enough to share, to be honest, and they can take that hit. So there is some truth to being the first. If you can get the large market share, someone could come in and take part of that, and then you can focus on the customer experience if you hadn't already. And then it becomes good. It feeds off each other. So I think if you're big enough, it really does make sense. If you're smaller, I don't think it does. Anybody disagree?
Well, and I do think that people hate change. So if I've already got my internet app and it's working well enough, and I have other things that are grabbing my attention, I'm probably not going to go around and price shop to see who else is out there.
I don't think so. I think people don't like change. I agree with that, but I think people shop internet as soon as it's not working well. So I think that is you really, even as a small guy, have to have a reliable service.
And there's really not a big barrier to changing providers. Not anymore.
Not anymore. I mean, we gave everybody email addresses, so
that used to be
that was a sticky thing. I had to change my email address when I sold the business. Oh, is that horrible? That was like 25 years of using that email address.
kc.rr.com email, which would have been from 1997, and they're still using it. And Time Warner Cable's Charter now is still.
Wow,
that blew me away when I got that. I think it was at work. Someone at work sent it to me.
Funny.
Yeah. Rick, love it or hate it, customer service will be the ultimate differentiator.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it. How could I say anything different after that interference story that I told, right? I mean, again, it's an extreme example, but it absolutely is true. At the end of the day, you're building relationships, and that is so strong that you get referrals from that. And
it's the best when a customer refers business to you. It's just, I know that's how our customers are growing, is through customer referral.
People don't do that if they don't believe in it. So to me, that's the ultimate compliment, and it really is the wind underneath your wings. So I'd be disingenuous to take another position on that one.
Ditto, love it. I mean, I gotta go with love it, because we've all said, that the customer support is what the local ISP, and the being in the community and being part of the community. So it's pretty hard not to go with love it. I can't come up with a hate it. I knew this was going to likely be a love it around the board. It's
kumbaya. I love it too. So
well, I love it because I'm customer relations.
I know. So,
but I'm very interested to see how, and we'll talk about this in a future episode, how AI is going to play into the customer service experience for these smaller operators, for sure. But I love it. I do think the client experience is the ultimate differentiator.
All right, I'm going to break away. Hate it. I'm going to go with technology. You need to be providing reliable service. You can have the best customer service in the world. But, I mean, don't get me wrong, customer service is super important. Technology, what are you customer serving? If you don't have something to serve, if you don't have a quality service to serve,
that's a fair point.
It doesn't matter how good your customer service is.
So is there a difference here between customer service and customer experience? Right? Because to me, I think of customer experience as all
It's a blended
and it includes
concept,
the network, right? So to have great customer service, you have to have a great experience. So if they're always calling in because your network's messed up and you're not taking care of that, you're not really servicing the customer. So I think ultimately it always comes back to how that customer experience and how you're servicing them myself.
Yeah, I mean, customer experience would be all encompassing, but that wasn't your question.
Your question was
Okay.
customer service.
Words
Say
matter,
so.
Paul.
Right.
Words matter.
I'm going to go back to Larry again.
All right.
Love it or hate it. Subsidized competitors aren't your biggest threat. Complacency is.
Complacency, love it. This is an industry where you can sit still. I mean, I start off saying, you got you're reiterating over and over and over again. If you're complacent and think, oh, I've built this, they will come. They will eventually. They will originally, but that will not last long.
What's interesting to me is in the LEC market, right? These incumbent and competitive LECs that have been out there forever, they're still out there and they still have customers. They aren't necessarily growing, but they've got a business that keeps going and they're complacent, right? So maybe you can, depending on the area. I think when it was more rural and you were a local exchange and you were the only option, yes. Now, if other people come in, that'll drive the competition, and then it's
look at some of those
complacency's
Lex profits. Their complacency is catching up with them.
Totally.
They are not where they were. At
There's
one
an
point.
expiry date.
Yeah, well, I keep saying that, but when is it, right?
It's the day after that. IPv4 is totally phased out.
Right.
Right. Once we've all moved to IPv6, right?
Tomorrow.
Because we'll
do it tomorrow.
Address space.
Yeah.
What about, I'm going to ask another one here. Love it or hate it, Georgette. It's better to stay small and profitable than chase scale.
I disagree.
Yeah.
I think there are some communities where that this is as big as you're going to grow because that's your decision. You just want to service this market. But to me, if you've got a good product, why are you not taking that product out take it to the edge, go a little further, bridging the digital divide across not just the United States and Canada, but across the globe. I mean, we've got customers around the world that are pushing the edge and pushing the envelope. So yes, continue to grow, continue to scale, and refine your processes so that your profitability leads you to be able to continue to grow. And it may be exponential growth. We've got customers that are lighting up literally 400 accounts a week.
Mhm.
I've got customers that haven't grown 400 accounts in a year. But what is their business plan?
I think it depends. I think if you started the business because you wanted to have that community experience and you wanted to get that fulfillment out of it, I've seen many exits that happened kind of against people's will because they got in, ahead of their skis and they took on too much and they needed to do that in order to keep their customers afloat. That was the only way to save the business and they no longer had the business. So I think, yes, it's a very noble thing to kind of, keep sowing your seeds and spreading, but I think you really have to make sure that you know what you're signing up for.
With churn that's happening out there, though, if you're not replenishing your customer base regularly, and that only comes through expansion, you're not going to stay afloat. You've got to go keep refilling that cup.
Won't it impact customer experience? Like we were talking about earlier, though, when you end up scaling, are you going to be able to have the local experience when you go to the next town like you do in this one?
I think it's possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Did your ISP that you were part of, did it grow like that? And were you able to add on communities and contain
geographically
maintain that customer experience?
We really did kind of, have a radius that was all drivable from the office. So we didn't quite get to that point. So I can't speak to that from experience, but I do think with the right model and the right approach, if you have kind of core groups rather than spreading thin like you were talking about earlier, I think it's possible.
Yeah.
Sure.
All right.
Almost like a franchise, right? I think that you could do this. Not many operators have, but I think that if you really kind of crack the code and you got a good formula going on, I think you could franchise your ISP. And because at the end of the day, a lot of these people accidentally start an ISP because they know the technology side and they know how to get people connected, but maybe they have no clue how to provide good customer service, how to package up the services so they make sense, right? So I think that actually a franchise could be a really cool play, because that would, the person that wants to own the technology side would have a playbook to follow, where that isn't all on them to figure out by making mistakes over and over and over and over and over again.
I think franchise model hasn't taken
That's
place in the
question.
ISP industry, because I had considered that a long time ago.
I kind of look at it.
I think everyone had that moment where it's like, should we?
But then I'm like, no, I'm just gonna keep.
Because operators don't
I'm
want to be
just
told
gonna
what
keep
to do.
scaling myself and getting
because I know better.
Because I know.
Well, we're seeing more and more open networks. That kind of feels like a franchise almost. You're providing the infrastructure, and they just sell your service, right, to their end users. Not
Yeah,
the same,
that's
or-
a sales and marketing business.
Yeah.
That's a little different.
Yeah. Okay.
And we do have a couple of customers who offer franchise opportunities in the ISP industry. It's not that it's non-existent at all.
It's just rare.
It's just rare.
Yeah.
And I think it's a little bit of a couple of different things. It's people don't want to be told what to do. They want to build their business of their own volition and follow their own North Star.
Well, there's a dark side to franchises, right? Where if you do color outside the lines, you're penalized, and so I think as a entrepreneur, getting into a franchise a lot of the time, regardless of what the vertical is a little bit scary for that reason.
Right,
an interesting
because
question,
you
though.
have to color outside the lines as an entrepreneur.
Right. Or that's the fun of it.
If there are even lines, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Did you know that YouTube is now the most popular platform for podcast consumption? If you're one of the millions of people who love watching their shows on YouTube, head over to our YouTube channel and tap subscribe.
All right, we're gonna do something fun now.
Okay.
At least I hope it's fun.
Unlike
It's
the rest of
time-
this horrible
Right,
episode.
sure. It's time for what if. So I'll throw out a what if scenario, and then go around the horn, and you share your 2 cents. So, Rick,
Yes.
what if a national provider moves into your market offering half your prices?
I mean, taken literally, that is quite upsetting. So once you get over that shock, I think it's time for a contract play, which maybe isn't a very popular opinion. I think across the industry that's becoming less commonplace. However, I think your options are limited if literally, the competitors, and it's 50% of your current price. So if you are already having some of your subscriber base under contract, that gives you some time to figure out what else you can do from like a marketing perspective to start to do some storytelling and I'm not saying, a smear campaign, but, highlight what makes you, and hopefully by the time contract renewal comes up, you've built up enough of a story where you're going to get that signature. And then otherwise, for all of your customers that are out of contract, talk to them. And I think you're going to have to give up on some price to hold on to that customer. But the good news is if I'm not saying that necessarily down to 50%, but somewhere between 0 and 50, and you make a compelling enough offer, they don't have the pain of having to leave you and schedule a technician and do whatever else they need to do and change their auto pay for their bill. And you've locked that customer in, and you at least, can sleep at night.
Was this not reality for you? I mean, this happened to us. We would have Charter.
Oh, when you started, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, we would have Charter come in and offer half of our price.
It didn't happen
Really?
often. No.
No, that happened to us.
What'd you do?
Almost identically 50% of our price.
Yeah, not what did you do?
Yeah.
The thing we did, I mean, we reached out to our customers, like you said. It's like we had to make them aware of the services that we're providing, the local support we're providing. We had to really emphasize the strong parts that make the small ISP successful, and that was the community involvement. And yeah, we lost some, obviously, because there are people who are going to price shop always. So we never wanted to be, well, I mean, yeah, we would love to have been the lowest cost provider, but we knew our costs. I was very meticulous at calculating costs. And we did drop our prices a couple of times because, as we all know, hardware got cheaper.
Oh yeah.
Bandwidth got cheaper.
Yep.
I mean, my first T1 costs less than my 1 gig, 5 gig lines, at the end.
And that's just going to continue and continue and continue.
Right.
Yep.
So you really need to.
When that happened, was that AT&T broadband? Was that TCI? Was that Comcast? Who did that to you?
It was
Name them.
It was literally
It was Charter.
It was.
I remember they were in some spots.
Oh yeah. Well, they didn't. Right. They didn't compete with us everywhere. Charter.
Yeah.
Charter just had a really small little,
They did.
little area there.
Yeah.
But when they started offering their internet, I think they looked at our price and literally picked half. And introductory pricing, that was the other game we never played.
It's the bait and switch.
It was the bait and
pricing,
switch.
and you don't realize that your bill has gone up by another $45 60 days in because you only saw the introductory price, and that's what stuck in your head.
And we did bring that to customers' attention too. This is it's half our price now, but not going forward.
Some of our customers do interesting things where they've assigned charter member status to their customers, so that we're going to guarantee you we're not going to take your rates up above X amount. Can the other operator offer you that? Or, hey, by the way, are you aware that we've got a customer referral program? And if you will, talk up the the experience that you've been having to one of your friends or three of your friends, we'll give you X amount of month off of your bill for 6 months. So it's a winning proposition. You just have to think about your marketing a little bit differently. But it's a scary situation when the national players are coming in and literally going door to door because they've brought in people that are staying in hotels and they're selling your service,
right?
And they have nothing to do with the community. By God, they've got that brand on their chest.
They did that. They did the door to door sales on us too. And I mean, don't get me wrong, we lost customers, and that was scary. But
did you have any come back?
We did, and we also knew that what we had to offer. So I mean, we really had those conversations, and they were our customers, and we were their friends, and we were their community. So,
but I think
you could have
that's
those.
Why it's important to track why people churned. Did they churn because of service? Did they churn because of a competitive offer? And when did they churn? Because then you can figure out what your bounce back play can be. I need to start doing a drip campaign to them at 4 months, 6 months, 12 month out, because they might be ready to come back home. Come home.
We were good about that from the get go. We always asked why, because that's just as important. I mean, when you lose a customer, they're expensive. They're hard to get. What did we do wrong? If there was something we did wrong, I mean, sometimes
if they're moving to California, that's one thing.
You can't do anything when they move, right?
Well, you can even learn about network problems that way. There are some customers that will not phone support. They will just find a new provider, right? And you could have some silent issues kind of, dripping out the bottom. And if you're not asking, it's just going to keep happening.
Agreed.
So I've never been a part of a small ISP. I've only been a part of rather large ones. And when we had overbuilders come in, we bring in some national resources, but it was really, we just focused the resources we had on that area first, right? And it was, let's clean our plan up. Let's make sure that if people are getting multiple trouble calls, let's reach out to them and say, hey, can you okay if we come out and work with you and try to figure out what's been driving this? And then we would follow it up with the door to door to try to get commitment from them on a long-term agreement. So when the overbuilder came in, it came harder, and it was actually quite successful. And the reason I bring that up, because I think it works the same way for a small ISP. If you do that, you don't necessarily have the resources that can come in, but if you focus those resources on that small area, you could do the exact same thing and have that exact same success, which is all about the customer experience.
That would pay off.
Yeah.
Yep.
We never did the door to door, but we would always tag the houses around where we do installs.
Yeah,
we would put
door hangers.
Yeah, door hangers. Okay.
It's so funny. People think that contracts are a dirty word, and no contract. But as a consumer, it protects me just as much as it protects the company I'm receiving the service from.
Absolutely.
My price is locked in, and I'm sorry, things are kind of sketchy right now. I don't know if my router goes bad when I can get a router replaced, or, are there supply chain issues that as a consumer I need to be concerned with. So I kind of would prefer to have a contract that says, hey, Georgette, you can be guaranteed this is what you're going to get for the next 36 months.
Yeah, don't assume that it's going to turn people off.
Yeah. Right. Massive competitors aren't your only problem. Staying ahead of AI, that's a whole different game. In our next episode, we're digging into how artificial intelligence could upend bandwidth, infrastructure, and everything in between. This one is going to be good. Subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts, and stay tuned.
Remember, when you connect communities, you unlock what's possible. Until next time.